He found my daughter in the snow, the biker said. His voice broke on the word daughter. His hands were shaking. This man, 6'3", 240 pounds, covered in prison tattoos, feared across 3 states, was on his knees in a hospital room, crying in front of a 7-year-old boy he had never met. The boy was barely alive. His body temperature was still dropping. He had given away his only coat in a blizzard to save a stranger's child. And the first thing he asked when he opened his eyes wasn't about himself. It was one question that shattered a man who had never been broken by anything. Before we go any further, if this story moves you, subscribe to this channel and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from so I can see just how far this story travels. Now let me take you back to the beginning, back to the boy nobody saw. Caleb Dawson was 7 years old, and he had already learned the most dangerous lesson a child can learn, that he didn't matter. Not because anyone told him, nobody had to. It was in the way teachers looked past him when they scanned the classroom, in the way kids chose teams at recess, and his name was never called, not even last, because last would mean someone remembered he was standing there. It was in the way he walked home from school every afternoon through the empty lot behind the gas station, and not a single person in the town of Elk Ridge, Wyoming, ever stopped their car or leaned out a window or said, "Hey kid, you need a ride?" He was invisible. And the worst part was he had gotten used to it. His mother, Laura Dawson, was 31 years old and looked 45. She worked the morning shift at a truck stop diner off Route 14, pouring coffee and carrying plates for men who tipped in coins if they tipped at all. 3 nights a week, she cleaned offices in town, vacuuming floors, scrubbing toilets, emptying trash cans, and came home after midnight smelling like bleach and exhaustion. Her hands were cracked. Her back ached every morning before her feet hit the floor. But she never once, not a single time, forgot to check on Caleb before she collapsed into bed. She would stand in his doorway, watch him sleep, and whisper the same things she had whispered every night since the day he was born. "You're my brave boy." She said it like a prayer, like if she said it enough times, the world would start to believe it too. Caleb's father, Danny Dawson, had been a roughneck on the oil rigs. Big hands, easy smile, the kind of man who could charm a room and empty a bottle in the same night. 2 years ago, he told Laura he was driving to Casper for a job interview. He took the pickup truck, the one that wasn't even his, borrowed from a buddy, and never came back. No phone call, no letter, no explanation, just a space at the kitchen table where a man used to sit, and a boy who watched the driveway every evening for 3 months before he finally stopped. Laura never explained it. She didn't know how. How do you tell a 5-year-old that his father chose leaving over staying? That some men walk out the door and the door just closes behind them and that's it. She tried once, sat him down at the table and started talking, and Caleb looked at her with those blue eyes and said, "It's okay, Mom. You don't have to say it." 5 years old, and he was already protecting her from the truth. That was Caleb. That was who he was. The kid who carried things that were too heavy for him because he had decided, somewhere deep in his 7-year-old heart, that his mother had enough weight already and he wasn't going to add to it. He ate lunch alone at school, every day, same seat, end of the table, back to the wall. He brought his lunch in a plastic grocery bag because Laura couldn't afford a lunchbox, and he folded the bag up after he was done and put it in his pocket so he could use it again tomorrow. Nobody sat with him. Nobody asked to. He watched the other kids talk and laugh and trade snacks, and he chewed his sandwich and looked at the table, and that was lunch. At recess, he went to the bench by the fence. Same bench every day, chipped paint, loose board on the right side. He sat there and watched the other kids play, and sometimes he moved his lips like he was part of a conversation that wasn't happening, a rehearsal for a friendship he hadn't figured out how to start. His teacher, Mrs. Parsons, noticed. She told the school counselor once that Caleb worried her, not because he was troubled, Not because he acted out, because he was vanishing. "He's disappearing right in front of us," she said, "and I don't know how to stop it." The counselor wrote a note in his file, suggested monitoring. Nothing happened. That was the thing about kids like Caleb. They didn't cause problems. They didn't make noise. They didn't demand attention. So the system, which was built to respond to crises, looked right past them. Because a quiet child sitting alone on a bench doesn't look like an emergency, but it is one. The only friend Caleb had was a dog, a stray golden retriever mixed with matted fur, a torn left ear, and a limp in his back right leg. Caleb found him in the empty lot 6 months ago, ribs showing, eating out of a tipped-over trash can. Caleb sat down on the ground next to him and split his sandwich in half and held out one piece and waited. The dog looked at him for a long time. Then he took the sandwich and inched closer and put his head on Caleb's knee. Caleb named him Huck. Every afternoon after school, Huck was there, waiting at the edge of the lot, tail going, that beat-up golden face watching the road until he spotted Caleb coming, and then the whole back half of his body would wag. Not just the tail, the whole body, the way dogs do when the person they love most in the world is walking toward them. Caleb talked to Huck, told him about school, about the kids who didn't see him, about his mom and how tired she looked, about his dad and how he kept having this dream where Danny's truck pulls into the driveway and the door opens, but nobody gets out. Huck listened to all of it, didn't judge, didn't leave, didn't look past him. Laura knew about the dog. She couldn't afford to feed him. She could barely afford to feed Caleb. But she saw the way her son's face changed when he talked about Huck. The only time his eyes lit up, the only time he sounded like a 7-year-old instead of a small, tired adult. And she couldn't take that away from him. So she stretched the grocery budget a little thinner and left scraps on the back porch and pretended she didn't notice when Huck started sleeping under the steps. Then came the day that changed everything. The National Weather Service issued a blizzard warning for the entire county. The worst storm system in a decade. 40-mile-an-hour winds, temperatures dropping below zero, 2 feet of snow expected by nightfall. Schools closed at noon. The town shut down. Laura called from the diner. Her voice was tight with that particular kind of fear that mothers carry, the kind that lives in their chest at all times. Quiet most days, screaming on days like this. "Caleb, baby, listen to me. Stay inside. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone. I'm going to come home as soon as the roads are clear. There's cereal in the cabinet. Stay warm. Stay inside." "Okay, Mom. Promise me." "I promise. I love you. I love you too." He locked the door, turned on the TV, ate cereal from the box, wrapped himself in a blanket on the couch and watched cartoons while the wind screamed outside and the windows rattled in their frames and the old furnace groaned like it was fighting a losing battle. He was okay. He was doing what his mother told him. And then, at 2:17 in the afternoon, Huck started barking. Not outside, under the back porch. His bark was different. Caleb knew every sound that dog made. The happy bark when he saw Caleb coming. The low bark when a stranger walked past. The whiny bark when he was hungry. This wasn't any of those. This was something Caleb had never heard before. Sharp, frantic, desperate. The kind of bark that didn't stop, that kept going and going and going, rising in pitch like an alarm that someone was pulling over and over. Caleb went to the back window. Through the wall of falling snow, he could barely see Huck. The dog had come out from under the porch and was standing at the tree line behind the house, facing the woods, barking into the white nothing. Then he turned, looked at the house, looked at the window where Caleb was standing, and barked again, louder. Then he took 3 steps toward the woods, stopped, looked back at Caleb. Come. That's what the dog was saying. Caleb understood it the way you understand something in your gut before your brain catches up. Huck wasn't scared. Huck was telling him something. Huck had found something in those woods, and he needed Caleb to follow. Caleb looked at the locked door, heard his mother's voice. "Stay inside. Promise me." Huck barked again, longer this time, more urgent, and somewhere deep in his chest, in the place where the truest things live, in the place that told him to share his sandwich with a stray dog, and sit with his mother when she cried, and keep walking home alone without complaining, that place said go. He put on his boots, pulled on his coat, the only coat he owned, a second-hand parka from the Goodwill, olive green, 2 sizes too big, with a zipper that jammed halfway up every single time. He wound a scarf around his neck, pulled on his gloves, which were already thin and wouldn't last 20 minutes in this cold. He unlocked the door. The wind nearly knocked him down. The cold was something physical, something that hit his face and his chest and his hands all at once, like walking into a wall made of knives. His eyes watered instantly. His breath came out in a cloud that the wind ripped apart. He stepped off the porch and into the storm. Huck was already moving. The second Caleb's boots hit the snow, the dog turned and bolted toward the tree line, not running exactly, but moving fast and purposeful, stopping every few yards to look back and make sure Caleb was still coming. Caleb followed. The snow was up past his knees. Every step was a fight. He pushed through it, arms pumping, breath ragged, following the golden shape of Huck through the white. They crossed the backyard, past the old fence post that stuck out of the snow like broken teeth, into the tree line where the pines closed in and the wind dropped slightly, but the cold didn't. Caleb's gloves were soaked through in minutes. His fingers started to burn, then ache, then go numb. The zipper on his coat was jammed at his chest, leaving the bottom half open, and the wind found every gap. They crossed the frozen creek. Caleb's right boot broke through a thin patch of ice, and freezing water flooded in up to his ankle. He gasped. The cold shot up his leg like electricity. He yanked his foot out and kept going. His toes were numb in seconds. Huck pushed through dead brush. Caleb followed, branches scratching his face, snow falling from the limbs above onto his head and down his neck. His body was shaking now, hard. The kind of shaking you can't control, that comes from somewhere deep inside you where the heat is stored, the body's last defense before it starts shutting down. Then Huck stopped, dead still, nose down, tail flat, not barking anymore. Caleb caught up, breathing so hard his chest ached, and looked at what Huck was looking at. At first his brain couldn't make sense of it. A shape, pink and white, half buried at the base of a big pine tree, the snow already building up around it like the ground was pulling it under. Then the shape became a coat. Then the coat became a child, a little girl. She was lying on her side, curled up, knees to her chest, blonde curls frozen against her face, a pink winter coat soaked completely through. Her skin was a color Caleb had never seen on a living person, grayish blue, like something that had been left in water too long. Her lips were almost white. Her eyes were closed. Caleb dropped to his knees beside her. Hey, can you hear me?" Nothing. No movement, no sound. He pulled off his glove and pressed 2 fingers against her neck, the way he'd seen someone do on a TV show. He didn't know what he was supposed to feel. He pressed harder. His own pulse was hammering so loud in his ears, he couldn't tell what was his and what was hers. Then he felt it. A beat. One beat. So faint and so slow it was like a whisper from somewhere far away. Then another, a long time later. Then another. She was alive. But just barely. Just a thread. Just a last light flickering in a body that was running out of time. Caleb didn't know her name. Didn't know where she came from. Didn't know that 6 miles north, over 200 men were tearing the valley apart looking for her. Her name was Lily Mercer, 3 years old, daughter of Jagger Brick Mercer, senior enforcer of the Wyoming Charter of the Hells Angels. A man who had done 12 months in Rawlins State Prison. A man with fists like sledgehammers and a temper that had cleared out bars, and a reputation that made grown men step aside. but also a man who sang his daughter to sleep every night, who let her paint his fingernails pink and didn't wash it off, who called her my lily bug and meant it more than he'd ever meant anything in his life. She had wandered out of the club's compound during a winter meeting, a side door left unlatched, a 3-year-old's curiosity, and a blizzard that swallowed her footprints in minutes. By the time Sarah Mercer realized her daughter was gone and screamed her husband's name, and Brick came crashing through the lodge like a man on fire, by then it was already too late to track her. The snow had erased everything. 200 men searched. Trucks, bikes, ATVs, men on foot screaming her name into a wind that threw the sound back in their faces. They searched east. They searched north. They searched the roads and the trails in every direction that made logical sense for a child to wander. None of them went far enough west. None of them reached the frozen creek bed and the old-growth pines where a 3-year-old girl lay dying. Only a 7-year-old boy and a stray dog went that far. Caleb looked at the girl. His mind was working fast, the way children's minds work when the world suddenly becomes simple and terrifying, and there is no adult coming to tell them what to do. He couldn't carry her. She was dead weight and he was 7, and his arms were already shaking. He couldn't run for help. He didn't know where help was. He didn't even know where he was. The storm had swallowed everything. There was nothing but white and cold and the sound of the wind and this little girl who was going to die if somebody didn't do something right now. She's cold. That was the only thought, clear and clean and cutting through everything else like a blade. She's cold, and I can fix that. He unzipped his coat. The broken zipper fought him, and he yanked it hard, ripping it open. He pulled the coat off his shoulders, and the cold hit his body like he'd been thrown into a frozen lake. His thin gray sweater, the one Laura had bought for $2 at the Goodwill, was nothing. The wind went through it like it wasn't there. His whole body seized, his lungs locked. For one terrible second, he couldn't breathe at all. Then he could, and he moved. He wrapped the coat around the girl, tucked it under her, pulled the hood up over her frozen curls, zipped it as far as the broken zipper would go. His hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries. Then he lay down beside her, right there in the snow, on the frozen ground, in a blizzard, in a sweater, 7 years old. He pressed his body against hers, wrapped his arms around her small frame, pulled her against his chest the way his mother held him during thunderstorms, tight and close and fierce, like he could shield her from the whole world with just his body. And he talked. Hey, it's okay. I'm right here. My name's Caleb. I don't know your name, but that's okay. We're gonna be okay. My mom always says everything looks better in the morning. She says that every time, even when things are really bad, and she's always right. So we just have to make it to morning, okay? We just have to hold on. The girl didn't move, didn't open her eyes, but the pulse was still there under his fingers, that impossible tiny beat, stubborn and slow. I have a dog. His name's Huck. He's right here. He's the one who found you. He's real smart. He's got a torn ear, but he doesn't care. He's the bravest dog I know. Huck had lain down on the other side of the girl, pressing his warm body against her back. 3 living things huddled together at the base of a pine tree, while the world tried to freeze them out of existence. My mom makes pancakes on Sundays, the ones with chocolate chips inside. She lets me put extra syrup. You like pancakes? I bet you do. When we get out of here, I'll tell my mom to make you some. She makes the best ones. His teeth were chattering so hard the words came out in fragments. His body was shaking violently now. The cold had gone past his skin, past his muscles, into his bones. He could feel something heavy and dark pulling at the edges of his mind, like a curtain being drawn closed slowly from both sides. But he didn't let go. Not of the girl, not of the words. My dad left, a while ago. He just drove away and didn't come back. I used to think maybe he'd come back one day. I don't think that anymore. But that's okay because my mom My mom is everything. She works so hard. She's always tired, but she always checks on me. Every night, she stands in my door and she says, his voice was fading, getting softer. The spaces between words were growing longer. She says I'm her brave boy. He pressed his face against the girl's hair. It was frozen and it smelled like snow and something sweet, like baby shampoo. I'm trying to be brave right now, he whispered. I'm really trying. 38 minutes. That's how long they lay in the snow. 38 minutes of a 7-year-old boy holding a 3-year-old stranger against his chest, talking about pancakes and dogs and his mother, while his body temperature dropped degree by degree toward a line that the doctors would later say he came within 8 minutes of never coming back from. At 4:22 p.m., a search and rescue helicopter out of Cody made a pass over the western tree line. The pilot almost turned back. Visibility was near zero. The storm was too thick. But the co-pilot, a woman named Karen Reeves, who had been doing this work for 12 years, caught a flash of gold against the white. Huck's fur, bright and impossible against the snow. There, she shouted, 2 o'clock, something's down there. They circled back, dropped lower, and through a brief gap in the whiteout, they saw them. A dog, a boy, a small figure in pink. The pilot radioed it in. His voice was steady, but his hands weren't. 2 children found, western tree line, south of the creek bed. Immediate medical extraction. 1 child responsive, 1 unresponsive. 6 miles north, Brick Mercer heard the transmission on the club's emergency frequency. He was standing in a field, snow up to his thighs, voice gone, hands bleeding from ripping through brush and deadfall for 2 straight hours. He had refused to stop. 3 times his men had tried to bring him inside, and 3 times he had thrown them off. The 3rd time he had grabbed a prospect named Corey by the throat and slammed him against a truck and said, "My daughter is out there. You try to stop me again and I will end you. Do you understand me?" Nobody tried again. When the radio crackled and the words came through, 2 children found, alive. Brick's legs gave out, just buckled, like someone had cut the strings holding him up. He went down in the snow, on his knees, and a sound came out of him that 3 of his men would later say they had never heard from a human being. Not a scream, not a cry, something between the two, something raw and animal and broken with relief. Tank and Elias grabbed him, got him to his feet, half carried him to a truck. They drove toward the extraction point at 70 miles an hour on roads that shouldn't have been driven at 30. At the site, the paramedics had already separated the children. Caleb had been wrapped around Lily so tight that the lead paramedic, a 20-year veteran named Jim Otten, had to physically pry the boy's arms open. Even semi-conscious, even with his body shutting down, Caleb wouldn't let go. His frozen fingers were locked into the fabric of the coat, his coat, the only coat he owned. And when they finally pulled him away, he whispered something so quiet that Otten had to put his ear against the boy's lips to hear it. "Don't let her get cold again." Otten stood up, turned away from his team, walked 4 steps into the snow, and pressed his fist against his mouth and stayed there for 10 seconds. 20 years of rescue work, car wrecks, house fires, drownings. He had seen everything. He had not seen this. They loaded both children into the helicopter. Caleb on one stretcher, Lily on the other. Huck tried to follow, and a paramedic held him back, and the dog barked and fought and strained until someone from the ground team picked him up and held him. "We'll take care of the dog," the ground team leader radioed. "Just get those kids out of here." The helicopter lifted off into the gray sky. Below it, Brick Mercer stood in the snow beside the truck, watching the lights disappear, his chest heaving, his face wet, his hands clenched so tight his knuckles were white. Elias stood beside him. "She's alive, Brick. They said she's alive." Brick didn't respond. He got in the truck, slammed the door, stared straight ahead. Drive, he said. St. Francis. Now. They drove 40 miles through a blizzard. Nobody spoke. Brick sat in the passenger seat with his hands on his knees, not moving, not blinking, barely breathing. Tank, who was driving, glanced over once and saw something on Brick's face that he had never seen in 15 years of riding with the man. Fear. Pure, uncut, bottomless fear. The kind that only parents know. The kind that lives in a place so deep that nothing, not prison, not violence, not the worst things the world can throw at a man, can reach it. Only your child can take you there. Only the thought of losing your child can open that door. At St. Francis Regional, 2 trauma teams were waiting on the roof. They brought Lily down first. Core temperature, 88.7 degrees Fahrenheit. Severe hypothermia. But her pulse was steady. The coat had done enough. The boy had done enough. The doctors went to work. Caleb came down second. Core temperature, 90.4 degrees Fahrenheit and falling. Heartbeat, irregular. Unresponsive. They rushed him into a separate trauma bay, and the lead physician, Dr. Miriam Cho, took one look at his vitals and called for everything. Warming blankets, heated IV fluids, cardiac monitoring, the works. She turned to her team and said quietly, so the patient wouldn't hear even though he was unconscious, "This child is in critical hypothermia. We are in a window. Let's not waste it." Laura Dawson arrived at 6:40 p.m. She had gotten the call at the diner. Her manager, a heavy-set man named Dale, walked up to her at the counter and said, "Laura, there's a phone call for you. It's about Caleb." She didn't take off her apron. She didn't close out her register. She didn't say goodbye to anyone. She ran straight out the door, got in her car, a 15-year-old Honda Civic with a cracked windshield and bald tires and a heater that worked half the time, and drove 40 miles through a blizzard with her hands shaking so badly the wheel jerked back and forth across the center line. She came through the emergency room doors like a woman on fire, still in her apron, still smelling like coffee and bacon grease, hair coming loose from her ponytail, eyes wild. "My son! Where's my son? His name is Caleb Dawson. He's 7. Please, where is he?" A nurse named Ellen caught her, held her shoulders, looked her in the eye. "He's here. He's being treated. I'll take you to him." Room 214, second floor, dim lights, machines beeping in that steady rhythm that sounds like a countdown when it's your child in the bed. Warming blankets piled high, tubes in his arm, monitor on his chest. Caleb was so small in that bed, so pale, his blonde hair matted against the pillow, his lips still tinged with blue, his eyes closed. Laura sat down beside him, took his hand. It was cold, so cold that she flinched and then grabbed it tighter, wrapping both her hands around his, pressing it against her cheek, her tears running down onto his fingers. "You're my brave boy," she whispered. "You're my brave, brave boy. You come back to me. You hear me? You come back to me right now." His heart rate was 52, then 48, then 51, then 46. The numbers kept dropping and Laura watched them, and each drop felt like a hand squeezing her chest tighter and tighter until she couldn't breathe, and the nurse put a hand on her shoulder and said, "Talk to him. He can hear you. Just keep talking." So Laura talked. She told him about pancakes, about Sunday mornings, about the time he was 4 and tried to make her breakfast in bed and dropped an entire carton of eggs on the kitchen floor. And when she came downstairs, he was sitting in the middle of the mess, crying, saying, "I was trying to help, Mom." She told him about the day he was born and how he came out quiet, not screaming like most babies, just looking around with those blue eyes like he was already trying to figure out the world. She told him he was the best thing that had ever happened to her, the only thing that mattered, the reason she got up at 5 in the morning and worked until midnight and kept going when everything in her body told her to stop. "You are the reason, Caleb. You. So you come back, you hear me? You come back." At 11:47 p.m., his heart rate hit 62 and held. At 1:30 a.m., his temperature crossed 95 degrees. At 3:15 a.m., his eyes opened. He looked at his mother, looked at the room, looked at the tubes and the blankets, in the machines, blinked slowly. His voice was barely there, cracked and dry like paper tearing. "Mom?" Laura made a sound that was not a word. She pressed her face against his hand and sobbed. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." Caleb blinked again, swallowed hard. Huck found her, Mom, in the snow. She was so cold. "I know, baby. Is she okay? The little girl, is she okay?" Laura nodded. She could barely see him through the tears. "She's okay. She's going to be okay. Because of you." Caleb let out a breath, long and slow. His whole body seemed to settle into the bed, like something he had been clenching finally let go. "Good," he said, and he closed his eyes and fell asleep holding his mother's hand. And down the hall in room 208, a man covered in tattoos sat in the dark beside his daughter's bed, holding her tiny hand in his, listening to her breathe, knowing she was alive because a boy he had never met decided she was worth dying for. And he hadn't even met that boy yet. Huck didn't wait for him. The dog bolted the second Caleb's boots hit the snow, cutting through the backyard in a straight line toward the tree line, like he already knew exactly where he was going. Caleb tried to keep up, but the snow was past his knees, and every step felt like pulling his legs out of wet concrete. The wind slammed into his chest and he stumbled, caught himself, kept moving. Huck stopped 20 yards ahead and looked back, barking once, sharp, like a command. Like he was saying, "Move faster." Caleb moved faster. They crossed the back fence, or what was left of it, just 3 rotted posts sticking out of the white ground, and pushed into the trees. The pines blocked some of the wind, but the snow was still falling so thick that Caleb could barely see Huck's golden fur 10 feet in front of him. His gloves were already soaked through. His fingers burned. The zipper on his coat had jammed halfway again, and the wind found every gap, every opening, cutting straight through his sweater to his skin. He should have turned back. Any adult would have. But Caleb was 7, and the only thing in his head was Huck's bark, and the feeling in his chest that wouldn't let go. They crossed the frozen creek bed. Caleb's boot broke through a thin patch of ice, and freezing water flooded in up to his ankle. He gasped, pulled his foot out, kept walking. His toes went numb almost instantly, but he didn't stop. Huck was already past the fallen oak on the other side, pushing through dead brush that cracked and snapped against his body. Then Huck stopped, dead still, nose down, tail straight, not barking anymore. Caleb caught up, breathing hard, and looked where Huck was looking. At first he thought it was a pile of clothes. A pink bundle, half buried at the base of a big pine tree, snow already covering most of it. Then he saw the curls, blonde, frozen stiff, pressed against a face that was the wrong color. He dropped to his knees. It was a little girl. She was so small, smaller than any kid in his class. Her eyes were closed, and her lips were almost white, and her skin had gone a grayish blue that Caleb had never seen on a living person. Her pink coat was soaked through, and the snow had packed around her legs like the ground was trying to swallow her. Caleb pulled off his glove and pressed 2 fingers against her neck. He'd seen someone do it once on a TV show his mom watched. He didn't really know what he was looking for. He just pressed and waited. Nothing. His own heart was pounding so loud he thought maybe that was all he was feeling. Then it came, so faint he almost missed it. A tiny pulse, slow and weak, like a whisper from somewhere deep inside her body that was still fighting. She was alive, and she was dying. Caleb didn't know the word hypothermia. He didn't know that her core temperature had dropped below 90 degrees, that her organs were beginning to slow, that her heart was beating maybe 40 times a minute when it should have been over 100. He didn't know any of that. He knew she was cold. That was enough. He unzipped his coat. The broken zipper fought him, and he yanked it hard, ripping the teeth apart. He pulled the coat off his shoulders and the cold hit him like he'd been thrown into water. His thin, gray sweater, the one Laura had bought at the Goodwill for $2, was nothing. The wind went right through it. His whole body seized up, and for a second he couldn't breathe. He wrapped the coat around the girl, tucked it under her chin, pulled the hood up over her frozen curls. She didn't move, didn't open her eyes, but the pulse was still there under his fingers, that tiny, stubborn beat. Then Caleb did something that no training taught him, no adult told him, no textbook explained. He lay down beside her in the snow. He pressed his body against hers, wrapped his arms around her, pulled her into his chest the way his mother held him when he had nightmares. And he started talking. Hey, it's okay, I'm here. My name's Caleb. I don't know your name, but that's okay. You're gonna be okay. She didn't respond. He kept talking anyway. My mom makes pancakes on Sundays, the good kind, with a little chocolate chips inside. She lets me put extra syrup. You like syrup? I bet you do. Everybody likes syrup. His teeth were chattering so hard the words came out broken. He pulled her tighter. I have a dog. His name's Huck. He's right here, see? He's the one who found you. He's real smart. He's got a bad ear, but he doesn't care. He's the bravest dog in the whole world. Huck had laid down on the girl's other side, pressing his warm body against her back. The three of them, a boy, a dog, and a dying child, huddled together at the base of a pine tree while the blizzard screamed above them. Minutes passed. Caleb's shaking got worse. His words got slower. The spaces between sentences got longer. My mom says, everything looks better in the morning. She always says that, even when things are really bad. Even when... He couldn't finish the sentence. His jaw was locked. His arms were stiffening. He could feel something heavy and dark creeping in from the edges, like the cold was pulling him down into the ground. But he didn't let go of the girl. Not once. 38 minutes. That's what they told him later. 38 minutes in the snow with no coat, no protection, nothing between him and the storm but a $2 sweater and whatever was inside a 7-year-old boy that refused to quit. What Caleb didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that 6 miles north, over 200 men were tearing the valley apart looking for this girl. Her name was Lily Mercer, 3 years old, blonde curls, green eyes, a laugh that the men in the club said could stop a room. She was the only daughter of Jagger Mercer, the man everyone called Brick, senior enforcer of the Wyoming charter of the Hells Angels, a man who had done 12 months in Rawlins, a man with hands the size of dinner plates and a temper that had cleared out bars, a man that other hard men did not look in the eye. Lily was his whole world, and everyone in the club knew it. She had been at the compound that afternoon during a winter meeting, 30, 40 members inside the main lodge, families in the front room, kids running around. Someone had propped open the side door to carry in supplies and hadn't latched it when they came back in. Lily had walked out that door. No one saw her, a 3-year-old in a pink coat, wandering into a blizzard. By the time Sarah Mercer, Lily's mother, realized her daughter wasn't in the front room, 7 minutes had passed. She checked the bathroom, the kitchen, the back room. Then she started screaming. Brick was in the middle of a conversation with 2 charter presidents when he heard his wife's voice, and something in it made every man in that room go quiet. He was through the door before anyone else moved. Sarah was in the hallway, white-faced, hands shaking, saying words that didn't make sense at first. She's gone. I can't find her. She's gone. Brick didn't ask questions. He went straight for the side door, saw it unlatched, and hit it so hard it cracked the frame. He was outside in the snow before anyone could follow. No coat, no gloves, just a t-shirt and boots and a father's terror. Within 10 minutes, every man at the compound was searching. Within 20, the call had gone out on the club's radio frequency, and riders from 3 counties were on their way. Trucks, bikes, ATVs, anything that could move in the snow. They spread out in teams, east toward the highway, north toward the ridge. Along every road, every trail, every path they knew. But Lily hadn't followed a path. She had wandered, the way 3-year-olds do. No direction, no logic, just walking until she couldn't walk anymore. And the wind had pushed her southwest, into the thickest part of the tree line, across the frozen creek, deep into woods that nobody searched because nobody thought a child that small could make it that far. Brick searched for 2 hours. His hands were bleeding from pulling through brush. His voice was gone from screaming her name. 3 times his men tried to bring him back inside, and 3 times he shoved them away. The 3rd time, he grabbed a prospect by the collar and said, "You bring me inside again, and I'll put you through that wall. My daughter is out there." No one tried again. At 4:22 p.m., a search and rescue helicopter out of Cody made a pass over the western tree line. The pilot almost missed it. The snow was too thick, the visibility too poor. But the co-pilot caught a flash of gold against the white, Huck's fur, bright against the snow, and called for a second pass. They saw them. A dog, a boy, and a small figure in pink, huddled together at the base of a pine tree. The pilot radioed in. 2 children found. Western tree line, south of the creek bed. Need immediate medical extraction. 1 child appears responsive. 1 does not. Brick was 3 miles north when the call came through. He heard the words on the radio and his legs gave out. 3 men caught him. Someone pulled a truck around and they loaded him in the back and drove. He didn't speak the entire way, just sat there, this massive man, hands between his knees, staring at nothing, breathing through his mouth like the air was too thin. At the extraction point, the paramedics were already working. They had separated Caleb from Lily, had to pry his arms off her because even semi-conscious, he wouldn't let go. His body was rigid. His skin was ice white. And when they pulled him away, he whispered something so quiet, the paramedic had to lean in to hear it. "Don't let her get cold again." They wrapped Lily in thermal blankets, started warming her, cut away the soaked pink coat and found Caleb's oversized parka underneath, the broken zipper, the second-hand lining, the coat that a boy took off his own body in a blizzard so a stranger's child could live. The lead paramedic, a 20-year veteran named Jim Otten, said later in an interview that in all his years of rescue work, he had never seen anything like it. A 7-year-old boy, alone in a storm, giving away his only protection to save someone he didn't know. Otten said he had to step away from the helicopter after they loaded both kids in because he didn't want his team to see him cry. They flew to St. Francis Regional, 40 miles south, the longest 40 miles of Brick Mercer's life. He rode in the truck behind the helicopter's path, watching the lights disappear into the gray sky, and for the first time since he was 19 years old, sitting in a county jail cell the night his own father died, Jagger Brick Mercer prayed. Not to anyone in particular, not with any words he'd learned, just a raw, desperate thing that came out of his chest like a sound more than a sentence. "Please, please, not her, not my baby, please." At the hospital, 2 teams were waiting on the roof. They brought Lily down first. Core temperature 88.7, severe hypothermia, but stable pulse. The coat had done it. The shared body heat had done it. The boy had done it. Lily was going to live. Caleb came down second. Core temperature 90.4 and still dropping. Irregular heartbeat, unresponsive. They rushed him into the trauma bay, and for the next 6 hours, the medical team fought to bring a 7-year-old boy back from a place he had gone willingly so that someone else's daughter could survive. Laura arrived at 6:40 p.m. She had gotten the call at the diner. The manager said she didn't even untie her apron. She ran straight to her car, a 15-year-old Honda with a cracked windshield and bald tires, and drove 40 miles through a blizzard with her hands shaking so badly she could barely keep the wheel straight. She burst through the emergency room doors, still smelling like coffee and bacon grease, her apron strings flying behind her. A nurse caught her before she collapsed. "My son! Where is my son? Please, where is my son?" They took her to him. Room 214, second floor. Dim lights, machines beeping, warming blankets piled on top of a body that looked too small for the bed. Tubes in his arm, monitor on his chest. Laura sat down, took his hand. It was cold, so cold. She pressed it against her cheek and whispered the things she had said to him every single night since the day he was born. "You're my brave boy. You're my brave, brave boy." Caleb didn't respond. His heart rate was 52, then 48, then 51, then 46. At 8:15 p.m., the doctor came in and told Laura they were doing everything they could, that the next few hours would tell them if the rewarming was working or if his heart would stabilize. He used words like guarded prognosis and cautious optimism, and Laura didn't hear any of them. She just kept holding his hand and whispering. At 11:47 p.m., Caleb's heart rate hit 62 and held. At 1:30 a.m., his temperature crossed 95 degrees. At 3:15 a.m., he opened his eyes. He looked at his mother, looked at the room, looked at the tubes and the machines and the blankets piled on his chest. "Mom?" Laura broke. She put her face against his shoulder and sobbed so hard the nurse came running. But it was okay. It was all okay. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." Caleb blinked. His voice was barely a whisper, cracked and dry. "Huck found her, Mom, in the snow. She was so cold." "I know, baby. I know. Is she okay?" Laura nodded, tears running down her face. "She's okay. She's going to be okay because of you." Caleb closed his eyes. A small breath left his body. Not a sigh, something deeper, something like relief that goes all the way to the bottom of a person. "Good," he said, and fell asleep holding his mother's hand. Down the hall, in room 208, Brick Mercer sat in a chair beside his daughter's bed. Lily was asleep, warm, color coming back to her cheeks, her small hand wrapped around his index finger the way she always held on to him, even in sleep, like she was making sure he wouldn't leave. He hadn't moved from that chair in 6 hours. Sarah was asleep on the couch by the window, exhausted. The room was quiet except for the machines and Lily's breathing. Brick sat there in the dark and thought about a boy he had never met. A boy with no father. A boy with nothing. A boy who walked into a blizzard because a dog told him someone needed help, and gave away the only thing he had. Brick looked at his daughter's face, touched her curls, felt her pulse under his fingers, steady and strong and alive. Then he leaned forward, pressed his forehead against the bed rail, and cried without making a sound. He didn't sleep that night, not a single minute. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same image, Lily's face, gray and still, half buried in the snow, and his body would jolt like he'd touched a live wire. So he sat there, watched her breathe, counted the seconds between each breath like a man counting the only thing that mattered. At 6 a.m., a nurse came in to check Lily's vitals. Temperature 94 and climbing, heart rate normal, oxygen good. The nurse smiled and said, "She's doing beautifully. She's a fighter." Brick nodded. He couldn't speak yet. Sarah woke up around 7. She came to the bed, touched Lily's forehead, and let out a breath she'd been holding since yesterday afternoon. Then she looked at Brick and saw his face, and whatever she was about to say, she didn't say it. She just put her hand on his shoulder and stood there. At 7:45 a.m., Dr. Miriam Cho, the attending physician who had led Lily's treatment, came into the room. She was a small woman, barely 5'3", with glasses and a calm voice that sounded like she had delivered every kind of news a doctor could deliver and had learned how to carry the weight of all of it. She told Brick and Sarah that Lily was going to make a full recovery. No frostbite damage to her extremities, no signs of organ compromise. Her body had been protected just enough, just long enough for the rewarming to work. Honestly, Dr. Cho said, the fact that she was wrapped in that coat and held for that long is the reason she's in this bed and not in the morgue. I don't say that lightly. I've been doing this for 17 years, and the margin here was razor thin. If that boy had waited even 10 more minutes to go out, or if he hadn't given her his coat, we would be having a very different conversation right now. Sarah pressed her hand over her mouth. Brick stared at the doctor. How's the boy? Dr. Cho paused. Something shifted in her expression, subtle but unmistakable, and Brick caught it immediately because he was a man who had spent his entire life reading faces for things people wouldn't say out loud. He's stable, she said carefully. His temperature is coming up, but he was exposed longer than your daughter and without any protection. The next 24 hours will tell us more. That's not what I asked. How is he? Dr. Cho looked at him for a long moment. He's a very brave little boy, and he's going to need time. Brick nodded slowly. He looked at Sarah, looked at Lily. Then he stood up from the chair and his knees cracked and his back ached from sitting in the same position for 7 hours, but he barely felt it. I need to see him. Sarah reached for his arm. Brick! I need to see him, Sarah. She didn't argue. She had known this man for 11 years. She knew the look on his face. She knew what it meant when Jagger Mercer decided something needed to happen. You didn't stand in the way of it. You let it happen, and you hoped it went the direction it was supposed to. Brick walked out of Lily's room and into the hallway. His boots were heavy on the linoleum floor. Two of his guys, Tank and a road captain named Elias, were sitting in the waiting area down the hall. They had been there all night. They stood up when they saw him. Where's the kid? Brick said. Room 214, Elias said. Second floor. His mom's with him. Anyone else? No, just her. Brick headed for the elevator. Tank started to follow, and Brick held up one hand without turning around. Stay here. Tank stopped. Brick rode the elevator alone. When the doors opened on the second floor, he stood there for a moment, not moving, just breathing. His chest felt tight in a way that had nothing to do with the cold or the exhaustion. It was something else, something he didn't have a word for, but felt like standing at the edge of a cliff and knowing you had to jump and not knowing what was at the bottom. He walked down the hall, counted the room numbers, 210, 212, 214. The door was half open. He stopped outside it and looked in. Laura Dawson was sitting in the chair beside the bed. She was still wearing her diner apron over a flannel shirt. Her hair was pulled back, but pieces had come loose and hung around her face. She was holding Caleb's hand with both of hers, resting her forehead against their joined fingers, not sleeping but not fully awake either, just existing in that hollow space where exhaustion and fear and relief all collapse into the same thing. Caleb was in the bed, awake. His blonde hair was flat against the pillow, and his face was pale, but his eyes were open. Blue eyes, quiet and steady, and too old for a 7-year-old. He was looking at the ceiling, blinking slowly, like a kid who was trying to figure out whether the world he had woken up in was the same one he had left. Brick knocked on the doorframe. Laura's head snapped up. She saw him and her whole body went rigid. She saw the size of him, the tattoos, the leather vest, the scars. Every instinct in her said danger, and it showed on her face before she could stop it. Ma'am, Brick said. His voice was low and rough and careful in a way that surprised even him. My name is Jagger Mercer. People call me Brick. The little girl your son found in the snow is my daughter. Laura's grip tightened on Caleb's hand. She didn't speak. Her eyes were wide and red-rimmed and searching his face for something. A threat, a demand, a reason to be afraid. She had spent her whole life around men who took things. She didn't know yet what kind of man was standing in her son's doorway. I'm not here to cause you any trouble, Brick said. I just want to talk to your boy, if that's okay with you. Laura looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at the man in the doorway. No fear on the boy's face, just curiosity. Laura nodded once, slowly, and leaned back in her chair but didn't let go of Caleb's hand. Brick walked into the room. He had been in a lot of rooms in his life. Prison cells, courtrooms, rooms where things happened that he would never talk about. He had walked into every one of them with his back straight and his eyes hard and his body set like a man who was ready for whatever came next. This room brought him to his knees, not figuratively. He walked to the bed, looked down at the boy, this small, thin, pale boy in a hospital gown that was too big for him, with tubes in his arm and a monitor beeping on his chest, and blue eyes that looked up at Brick without flinching. And Brick's legs gave out. He went down, both knees on the cold linoleum floor, right there beside the bed. His hands gripped the bed rail, and his head dropped, and his shoulders started shaking, and a sound came out of him that he didn't recognize because he hadn't made it in 20 years. He was crying. Not quiet crying, not the kind of crying you can control or hide or swallow back down, the kind that breaks out of you like something that has been locked in a room too long and finally kicks the door open. His whole body shook with it. Tears fell onto the bed rail, onto his hands, onto the floor. Laura stared at him. This enormous man on his knees beside her son's bed, crying like a child. Caleb stared at him too. But something in the boy's face changed. Something softened. Like he understood, on a level that had nothing to do with age or experience, what was happening to this man. Brick raised his head. His face was wet. His eyes were swollen. He didn't wipe the tears. He didn't care. He reached out and took Caleb's small hand, so small it disappeared inside his, and held it. "You saved my daughter," Brick said. His voice was broken, every word cracked. "She's 3 years old. She's my whole life. And you found her in the snow and you took off your coat and you held her. You almost died for her. You don't even know her name and you almost died for her." Caleb looked at Brick's hand wrapped around his. Then he looked up at Brick's face. "Is she warm now?" 3 words. 3 words from a 7-year-old boy lying in a hospital bed after nearly dying of hypothermia. And the first thing he wanted to know, the only thing he cared about, was whether the girl was warm. Brick couldn't answer. He pressed his forehead against Caleb's hand and cried harder. Laura put her free hand over her mouth. Her shoulders shook. The tears came so fast she couldn't see. Somewhere down the hall, a nurse named Patty Gilmore was walking past room 214 and heard the sound and stopped in the doorway and saw what was happening and turned away quickly because she was 23 years into this job and thought she had seen everything, and realized in that moment she hadn't. It took Brick a long time to get himself together. He didn't rush it. He didn't pretend it wasn't happening. He stayed on his knees and held the boy's hand, and when the wave finally passed, he looked up at Caleb and said, "She's warm. She's sleeping. She's going to be okay because of you." Caleb nodded, a small nod, like that was all he needed. "What's her name?" Caleb asked. "Lily. That's a nice name." Brick almost broke again. He held it together by a thread. "Yeah," he said, "it is. Is Huck okay?" Brick blinked. "Who's Huck?" "My dog. He found her first. He led me to her. Is he okay?" Brick looked at Laura. Laura wiped her eyes and nodded. "The rescue team picked him up. He's at the shelter. He's fine." "I need to get him," Caleb said. There was urgency in his voice for the first time. Not about himself, about the dog. "He doesn't like being alone. He gets scared." Brick squeezed the boy's hand. "I'll get him myself. Tonight. I promise you." Caleb searched Brick's face for a long moment. Then he said, "Okay." And that was it. A promise made from a man on his knees to a boy in a hospital bed. As simple as that, and as heavy as anything Brick had ever sworn in his life. He stood up, slowly. His knees ached. His eyes were raw. He looked at Laura. "What's your name, ma'am?" "Laura. Laura Dawson." "Laura, I want you to know something. What your son did. I have ridden with men for 20 years. Hard men. Men who would go to war for each other without blinking. And not one of them has ever done what your boy did yesterday. Not one. Laura broke. She had been holding it together barely, and that was the thing that finished her. She bent forward in the chair and pressed her face against Caleb's shoulder and sobbed. Because she had raised this boy alone, had worked double shifts and skipped meals, and taped up a leaking roof, and worried every single night that she wasn't enough, that he wasn't getting what he needed, that she was failing him in all the ways that counted. And here was a man, a stranger, a man from a world she didn't understand, telling her that her son was something extraordinary. Brick didn't touch her, didn't try to comfort her. He just stood there and let her cry because he knew, from his own life, from his own failures, from all the nights he had sat in a cell and wondered if he was worth anything, that sometimes the thing a person needs most is to hear that the thing they poured their life into mattered. When Laura raised her head, Brick said, "I'll be back. We're not done here, not by a long way." He walked out of room 214 and down the hall to the elevator. Elias and Tank were waiting. They saw his face and said nothing. Nobody says anything to a man who has just been broken open and put back together in a way that shows. Brick pulled out his phone and called a number. It rang twice. "It's Brick. Call every charter within 500 miles. I need them here by Monday morning." The voice on the other end hesitated. "All of them?" "All of them. Every single one. And tell them to bring their bikes. I don't care if they have to ride through ice. I don't care if it takes them all night. I want 500 men on Cedar Avenue by 7:30 Monday morning." "What's going on, Brick?" Brick looked back down the hall toward room 214, toward a 7-year-old boy who gave away his coat in a blizzard and asked if a stranger's daughter was warm. "A kid just taught us what the patch on our backs is supposed to mean," Brick said, "and we're going to show him we heard it." He hung up. That night, true to his word, Brick drove to the county animal shelter himself. He walked in, 6'3", tattooed, leather vest, and the woman at the front desk nearly called the police. He told her he was there for a golden dog with a torn ear. She brought Huck out. Huck looked up at Brick with suspicious brown eyes and didn't wag his tail. Brick knelt down, held out his hand. "You're the one who found my girl," he said quietly. "Come on, boy. Let's get you back to your kid." Huck sniffed his hand, studied him, then slowly his tail moved. One wag. Two. Like a decision being made. Brick drove Huck to Laura's house. She was home from the hospital for the night to shower and change and grab clothes for Caleb. When she opened the door and saw Brick Mercer standing on her broken front step with Huck in his arms, she didn't know what to say. "Told the boy I'd bring his dog home," Brick said. Laura took Huck. The dog pressed into her chest and licked her face, and she laughed for the first time in 2 days, and it sounded like something that had been held underwater finally coming up for air. Brick looked past her into the house. He saw the bucket under the leak in the hallway ceiling. He saw the taped-up window in the kitchen. He saw the bare light bulb where a fixture used to be. He saw the couch with the torn cushion and the blanket draped over it to hide the stuffing coming out. He didn't say anything about it. Not yet. "Monday," he said. "I'll pick you and Caleb up at 7:15. Have him ready for school." Laura frowned. "He just got out of the hospital. He should rest." "Trust me," Brick said. "He needs to be at school on Monday." Something in the way he said it made Laura look at him differently. Not with fear anymore. Not with suspicion. With something closer to the way you look at a person when you realize they are carrying a plan that is bigger than what they are saying. "Okay," she said. Brick nodded, walked back to his truck, drove into the night. And the phone calls started. All night across Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, Colorado, phones rang in clubhouses and garages and kitchens and living rooms. The message was the same, passed from charter to charter, man to man, voice to voice. Brick's calling everyone in. Monday morning, Elk Ridge, 7:30, Cedar Avenue, full cut. Every man, nobody asked for details. When Brick called in a full assembly, you didn't ask questions. You got on your bike and you showed up. That was the code. That was the only code that mattered. By Saturday night, confirmations were coming in from 11 states. By Sunday morning, the number hit 300. By Sunday afternoon, it crossed 400. Men who hadn't spoken to each other in years. Men who had beefs and grudges in history. Men who had ridden in different directions a long time ago. All of them said the same thing. I'll be there. Sunday night, Brick sat in his garage alone. Lily was asleep upstairs, safe in her bed. Sarah curled up beside her. The house was quiet. He should have been sleeping. Instead, he was sitting on an overturned milk crate, staring at a piece of black leather on his workbench. A patch, custom cut, hand-stitched by Elias, who had learned leatherwork from his grandfather and had steady enough hands to put thread through a needle by flashlight. 2 words on the front, white thread on black leather. Protected. Little brother. Brick picked it up, held it under the light, ran his thumb over the stitching. He thought about his own childhood, a trailer park in Billings, a father who drank, a mother who left. Fists in silence in the kind of cold that has nothing to do with weather. He had been invisible once. A long time ago, before the club, before the leather, before he built himself into a man that people feared because fear was the only thing that kept you from being forgotten. And now a 7-year-old boy with no coat and no father had done something Brick had spent his entire adult life trying to do. He had made people see him. Not by being loud, not by being hard, not by putting his fists through walls or his name on a rap sheet, by lying down in the snow beside a stranger and refusing to let go. Brick wrapped the patch in black cloth and placed it in his saddlebag. Then he went upstairs and checked on Lily one more time. She was sleeping with her mouth slightly open, one hand curled around Sarah's finger, breathing steady and deep. He stood there for a long time. Then he went to bed, because Monday was going to be the most important morning of his life, and he needed to be ready for it. He woke before the alarm, 4:47 a.m. The house was dark and still, and something in his chest was already pounding, like his body knew what this day was before his mind caught up. He lay there for exactly 1 minute, staring at the ceiling, then swung his legs off the bed and stood up. Sarah stirred. "What time is it?" "Early. Go back to sleep." "Brick." He stopped at the door. "Bring that boy something from Lily. She picked something out yesterday. It's on the kitchen counter." He went downstairs. On the counter was a small plastic bag with a stuffed animal inside. A golden dog, soft and new, with floppy ears. Lily had picked it from the hospital gift shop when Sarah had taken her down to the cafeteria the day before. Sarah had said she could choose anything she wanted, and Lily had gone straight for the golden dog without hesitation, grabbed it off the shelf and said, "For the boy." She didn't know Caleb's name yet. She just called him the boy. The boy who was warm. The boy who held me. Brick put the bag in his jacket pocket and walked out to the garage. His bike was ready. He had cleaned it himself the night before, polished the chrome, checked the tires, topped the tank. Not because it needed it, but because he needed something to do with his hands, while his mind ran through Monday morning, over and over like a film he couldn't stop rewinding. He fired the engine at 5:15 a.m. The rumble shook the garage walls. He backed out into the cold, dark air and headed north toward the rally point, a truck stop parking lot on Route 14, 8 miles from town. He was the first one there. By 5:30, he wasn't alone. They came out of the dark like ghosts, headlights cutting through the frozen air one by one, then in pairs, then in groups. The sound built slowly, that deep, rolling thunder of Harley engines that you feel in your chest before you hear it in your ears. They pulled into the lot and lined up side by side, row after row, breath rising from the riders like smoke. Wyoming Charter, full strength, 31 men. Montana boys came next, then Idaho, then Colorado, then Charters Brick hadn't seen in years. Men from Utah, from Nebraska, from the Dakotas, from places so far away they must have ridden through the night without stopping. Tank stood at the entrance to the lot with a hand counter, clicking every bike that rolled in. At 6 a.m., he walked over to Brick and said, 280. Brick nodded. At 6:30, Tank came back. 390. At 6:55, Tank didn't come to Brick. Brick came to him. How many? Tank looked at the counter, then looked at Brick. 514. Brick closed his eyes, opened them. Line them up on Cedar Avenue, both sides, from the corner of Maple to the front steps of the school. Bikes on the curb, every man standing beside his machine. Engines off. Nobody talks. Nobody moves. Nobody does anything until I say. Tank started to walk away. Brick grabbed his arm. One more thing. If any man out there has a beer in his hand or a cigarette lit when that kid comes around the corner, I will personally break his jaw. This isn't a rally. This isn't a show. This is for a 7-year-old boy. We act like it. Tank nodded and went to work. 514 motorcycles rolled through the streets of Elk Ridge, Wyoming, in the gray early light of a Monday morning. They moved slowly, deliberately, in formation, 4 abreast, rumbling through the quiet town like a procession. People came to their windows. A woman on Pine Street dropped her coffee mug on the porch and didn't pick it up. A man walking his dog stopped on the sidewalk and stared with his mouth open as the line kept coming and coming and coming, bike after bike, for nearly 7 full minutes. They lined Cedar Avenue exactly as Brick had ordered, both sides of the street. From the corner of Maple all the way to the front entrance of Elk Ridge Elementary School. The engines cut off one by one until the silence was almost louder than the sound had been. 514 men stood beside their bikes, arms at their sides, full cuts, club patches. Most of them had faces that would make you cross the street, scars and ink and eyes that had seen things that don't fit into polite conversation. Men who had done prison time. Men who had buried friends. Men who had lived lives so far outside the lines that most of America would rather pretend they didn't exist. And every single one of them was there for the same reason. A 7-year-old boy they had never met. At 7:15 a.m., Brick pulled up to the Dawson house on his bike. Laura was standing on the porch. Caleb was beside her, holding her hand. He was wearing clean clothes, jeans, a flannel shirt, his old boots, no coat. The only coat he owned was in an evidence bag at St. Francis Regional, soaked through and half frozen, tagged as part of the medical report. Laura had wrapped him in a blanket for the walk to the car, but he had shrugged it off on the porch because he said it made him look like a baby. He was 7. He had almost died 4 days ago, and he was worried about looking like a baby. Brick killed his engine and walked up the steps. He looked at Caleb. The boy looked back at him with those steady blue eyes. No fear, no awe, just a kid looking at a man he had met once in a hospital room. "Hey, kid." "Hey, you ready for school?" Caleb shrugged, the kind of shrug that said yes and no, and I don't really want to talk about it all at the same time. "I got something for you," Brick said. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the plastic bag, handed it to Caleb. Caleb opened it, pulled out the stuffed golden dog, looked at it. "Lily picked that out," Brick said. "For you. She said it looks like your dog." Something moved across Caleb's face, quick, there and gone, but Brick saw it, a softening around the eyes, a tremble at the corner of his mouth that he bit down on fast, because 7-year-old boys don't cry in front of strangers, especially not 7-year-old boys who have learned to hold everything inside because there was never anyone to hold it for them. "Tell her thank you," Caleb said quietly. "You can tell her yourself. She'll be there." Laura stepped forward. "Beware, what's going on?" Brick looked at her. "I need you to drive him to school. Take Cedar Avenue. Trust me." Laura's eyes narrowed. She had trusted this man once already, on Sunday night, and she still didn't fully understand why. But something in her gut, the same something that had told Caleb to walk into the storm, said, "Do it." She put Caleb in the car, buckled his seatbelt, got behind the wheel. Brick rode ahead on his bike. They turned onto Maple Street. Normal, quiet, a few cars, nothing unusual. Then they turned onto Cedar Avenue. Laura hit the brakes so hard Caleb's seatbelt locked. She couldn't process it. Her brain refused to assemble the image into something that made sense. Motorcycles. Hundreds of them, lining both sides of the street, stretching all the way to the school. Chrome and black and leather as far as she could see. And men, hundreds of men, standing motionless beside their bikes, looking straight ahead, silent. Laura's hands came off the steering wheel. She covered her face. Her body shook. "Mom?" Caleb leaned forward. "Mom, what's wrong?" She couldn't answer. She was crying too hard. Caleb looked through the windshield. His mouth opened slightly. His eyes went wide. He pressed his face against the window and stared. "Mom, why are they here? Who are they?" Laura pulled her hands away from her face. Tears were streaming down her cheeks, but she was smiling and crying at the same time in that way that only happens when the world suddenly becomes bigger and kinder than you ever believed it could be. "They're here for you, baby." "For me?" "For you." Caleb looked at the motorcycles, looked at the men, looked back at his mother. "Why?" And Laura said the truest thing she had ever said, the thing she had been trying to tell him his whole life, the thing she whispered to him every night and meant with every broken, exhausted, fiercely loving piece of her heart. "Because you matter, Caleb. You've always mattered." Brick had parked his bike at the head of the line, right where Cedar Avenue met the school entrance. He was standing in the middle of the street. Lily was in his arms, wrapped in a pink blanket, awake and alert, her green eyes wide and curious. Sarah stood behind him. He watched Laura's car inch forward down the corridor of bikes. Slow, so slow, like she was afraid to break whatever this was by moving too fast. The car stopped 10 feet from him. The driver door opened. Laura got out. Then the passenger door. Caleb stepped out. The boy stood there, small, thin, blonde hair messy, no coat, holding a stuffed golden dog against his chest. 514 men looked at him, and Caleb looked back, not at the ground, not at his shoes, not at the space just past people's shoulders where invisible kids learn to aim their eyes so they don't have to see that no one is looking at them. He looked right at them, and they looked right back. Brick stepped forward. He stood in front of Caleb, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Brick shifted Lily to one arm and knelt down so he was at Caleb's eye level. Lily looked at Caleb, studied his face with the serious concentration that only very small children have. Then she reached out one tiny hand and touched his cheek. "Warm," she said. One word from a 3-year-old girl who had been dying in the snow 4 days ago, who was alive because a boy she didn't know decided her life was worth more than his comfort, more than his safety, more than anything he had. Warm. Brick's jaw clenched. His eyes went red. He breathed through it. Then he stood up and turned to face the assembly. All of them. 514 men. The biggest gathering of the Hells Angels in Wyoming history. Not for a funeral. Not for a ride. Not for a war. For a child. "Listen to me," Brick said. His voice carried down the street like a gunshot. "This boy is 7 years old. His name is Caleb Dawson. He has no father. He lives in a house with a leaking roof and a broken furnace. He owns one coat. One. And 4 days ago, when my daughter was dying in a blizzard, he took that coat off his body and wrapped it around a little girl he had never seen before. He lay in the snow for 38 minutes, holding her, talking to her, keeping her alive, while his own body was shutting down, while he was freezing to death." Brick paused. He looked at Caleb. The boy was standing very still, the stuffed dog pressed tight against his chest. his blue eyes fixed on Brick's face. My daughter is alive because of this boy. My little girl is breathing and laughing and calling my name because a 7-year-old kid with nothing decided to give everything he had to a stranger. His voice cracked on the word stranger. He swallowed hard. I have worn this patch for 20 years. I have ridden with every man on this street. I have bled with some of you. I have buried some of you. And I am telling you right now, standing right here in front of all of you, this boy lived our code better than we ever have. Better than I ever have. Dead silence. Not a cough. Not a shuffle. Not a breath. Brick reached into his saddlebag and pulled out the black cloth, unfolded it, held up the leather patch so every man on that street could see the white stitching. Protected, little brother. He knelt down and held it out to Caleb. This means something, kid. This means from today forward you ride with us. Not on a bike, not in the club, but in here. He tapped his chest. You are our little brother. Anyone who messes with you messes with every man on this street. Anyone who forgets you answers to 500 men. You understand? Caleb took the patch, held it in both hands, looked at the words. His lips moved slightly, reading them. Then he looked up at Brick and said something that nobody on that street expected. Does Huck get one too? A sound went through the crowd. Not laughter exactly, something warmer. Something that caught in men's throats and came out rough and broken. A few of them turned away. A few pressed their hands over their eyes. Brick smiled. The first real smile anyone in the club had seen from him in years. Yeah, kid, Huck gets one too. He stood up, faced the assembly, raised his right fist into the cold morning air. 514 men bowed their heads. Not a sound, not a whisper, not an engine. Just silence in the cold air and a 7-year-old boy standing in the middle of it all, holding a leather patch in one hand and a stuffed dog in the other. Finally, for the first time in his life, not invisible. On the school steps, Principal Deborah Keene was standing with both hands pressed to her mouth, tears running down her face. 3 teachers behind her were holding on to each other. One of them, Mrs. Parsons, Caleb's 2nd grade teacher, later said she couldn't teach for 10 minutes after the bell rang because every time she tried to speak, she started crying. Students were pressed against every window on the front side of the building, faces stacked on top of each other, mouths open, eyes wide. Some of the older kids were filming on phones they weren't supposed to have. Some of the younger kids were just staring, trying to understand why hundreds of giant men in leather were standing outside their school in perfect silence for the quiet kid nobody talked to. Parents in the parking lot stood frozen beside their cars. A father named Glenn Mayfield, who had never spoken a single word to Laura Dawson in 3 years of school pickups, was leaning against his truck with tears on his face, shaking his head slowly, saying to no one in particular, "That's somebody's son. That's somebody's boy. Jesus Christ." Caleb walked through them all. He walked down the center of Cedar Avenue between the rows of bikes and men, holding his mother's hand, the leather patch pressed against his heart. Laura was crying openly and didn't care. Caleb was not crying. His face was calm. His steps were steady. He walked like a boy who had just discovered something enormous and terrifying and beautiful. That the world could see him, that the world had been watching, and that the thing inside him that made him walk into the storm was the same thing that brought 500 men to his street. At the school steps he stopped, turned around, looked at the men, looked at Brick, who was still standing where he had been, Lily in his arms, watching. Caleb raised his hand. Not a fist, not a wave, just a small hand, held up in the air, palm out. A gesture that was somehow both a thank you and a goodbye and an I see you too. 514 men raised their hands back. Then Caleb turned and walked into the school, and the door closed behind him. Nobody moved for almost a full minute. Then Brick lowered his arm. He looked at Lily. She was playing with the zipper on his vest, completely unbothered. The way 3-year-olds move on from enormous moments because they haven't learned yet that some moments are supposed to break you. He kissed her forehead, handed her to Sarah, walked to his bike. Before he got on, Elias appeared beside him. Elias was not a man who showed emotion easily. He had done 8 years in federal prison and come out with a face that looked like it had been carved from a block of wood. But his eyes were red, and his voice was tight when he spoke. "What now, Brick?" Brick looked at the school, looked at the street, looked at the 500 men waiting for direction from the man who had brought them here. "Now we take care of him," Brick said. "That kid and his mother, the house, the dog, everything. We don't do it once. We don't do it for a week. We do it for good." "For good?" "For good." Elias nodded slowly. "And after that?" Brick didn't answer right away. He stood there with one hand on his bike, looking back toward the school where a 7-year-old boy was walking into a building where no one had ever noticed him before, carrying a leather patch that said he would never be forgotten again. "After that," Brick said, "we figure out how many other kids like him are out there. The ones with no coat, no father, no one watching. The ones who eat lunch alone and walk home alone and don't tell anyone because they've already decided nobody cares." He paused. "We find them, and we show up, the way we showed up today." He got on his bike, fired the engine. 514 engines roared to life behind him. And as the thunder rolled down Cedar Avenue and out of Elk Ridge and into the frozen Wyoming morning, Laura Dawson stood alone on the sidewalk, her arms wrapped around herself, her face wet, her heart full of something so big she thought it might tear her open. She watched the last bike disappear around the corner. Then she whispered it, to no one, to everyone, to the empty street and the cold air and the son she had raised alone in a house with a leaking roof and a broken furnace and not enough of anything except love. "They see him," she said. "They finally see him." Inside the school, everything was different, and Caleb felt it the second the door closed behind him. The hallway was the same hallway he had walked through 1,000 times. Same floor, same lockers, same smell of floor cleaner and old lunches. But the air was different. The way people looked at him was different. He could feel eyes on him from every direction. Not the usual kind, not the looking past him kind, but real eyes, seeing him for the first time. He kept his head down, held the patch against his chest, walked to his classroom. Mrs. Parsons was standing at her desk. Her eyes were still red. When Caleb walked in, she opened her mouth to say something, and nothing came out. She just nodded at him and pointed to his seat and turned away fast, pressing her fingers against her lips. Caleb sat down, put his backpack on the floor, put the patch inside his desk, put the stuffed dog beside it. The room filled up. Kids came in whispering. Every single one of them looked at Caleb as they passed his desk. Some stared. Some looked away quickly like they'd been caught doing something wrong. A girl named Madison Palmer, who sat 2 rows over and had never said a word to him in 2 years, walked past and said, "Hi, Caleb." Just like that, like they'd been friends forever. He said hi back, and something inside his stomach turned over because he didn't know how to do this. He knew how to be invisible. He had practiced it every day for as long as he could remember. He knew exactly where to sit so no one noticed, how to walk so no one looked, how to keep his face still so no one asked what was wrong. He was an expert at not being seen. He had no idea how to be seen. First period was reading. Mrs. Parsons started the lesson. Caleb tried to focus, but he could feel the kid behind him, Tyler Rowan, leaning forward, staring at the back of his head. After 5 minutes, Tyler whispered, "Dude, were those real Hell's Angels?" Caleb didn't turn around. "Yeah." "How many?" "I don't know. A lot. My dad said there were like 500 bikes on our street for you." Caleb didn't answer. He didn't know what to say to that. The sentence didn't fit inside his head. 500 bikes. For you. Those words had never existed in the same sentence before. Not in his life, not in any version of his life he had ever imagined. At recess, Caleb went to his usual spot, the bench by the fence, the one with the chipped paint and the loose board on the right side. He had sat there every recess for 2 years, alone, watching other kids play, pretending he didn't want to be out there with them, pretending the bench was a choice and not a sentence. He sat down, and then something happened that he did not expect. A boy named Derek Hall walked across the playground toward him. Derek was tall, popular, the kind of kid who always had someone to sit with, always had someone to throw a ball with, always had a group around him like a planet with moons. Derek had never looked at Caleb, not once, not in 2 years of sharing a classroom. Derek walked up to the bench, stood there. Caleb looked up at him and waited for whatever was coming. A question about the bikers, a joke, a dare, something that would make Caleb feel like a zoo animal behind glass. Derek sat down beside him. For a few seconds, neither of them said anything. Derek stared at the playground. Caleb stared at the playground. 2 boys on a bench, side by side, not talking. Then Derek said, "I should have sat here before." Caleb looked at him. "I saw you, every day. I saw you sitting here by yourself, and I didn't think about it. I don't know why. I just didn't. And I'm sorry." It was the most honest thing anyone at that school had ever said to Caleb. Not because the words were complicated, but because they were true, and truth from a kid is rarer than most people think. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You're here now." Derek nodded. "Yeah, I'm here now." By the end of that week, the bench wasn't empty anymore. Derek came back Tuesday. A kid named Oscar Fuentes came Wednesday. Madison Palmer and her friend Regan showed up Thursday with a bag of pretzels and asked if they could sit there too. By Friday, there were 7 kids crammed onto a bench built for 3, laughing about something stupid someone had said in class. And Caleb was in the middle of it, not saying much, but smiling in a way that Mrs. Parsons noticed from across the playground and had to turn away from because it broke her heart in the good way, the way things break when they're finally healing. 2 weeks after the motorcycles lined Cedar Avenue, Brick showed up at the Dawson house with 15 men and 2 flatbed trucks loaded with lumber, shingles, insulation, drywall, tools, and more groceries than Laura had bought in the last 6 months combined. Laura came to the door, saw the trucks, saw the men, saw Brick standing on her porch with a tool belt over his leather vest. "What is this?" "This is us fixing your house. I didn't ask you to fix my house." "No, ma'am, you didn't. And your boy didn't ask to save my daughter's life. But he did. So here we are." Laura opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. She had been taking care of herself and Caleb alone for 2 years. She had not asked anyone for help. Not once. Not when the roof leaked so bad she had to move Caleb's bed to the living room. Not when the furnace died in January and they slept in sleeping bags for a week. Not when she worked a double shift on Thanksgiving because the holiday pay was the only way she could cover the electric bill. She had carried it all herself because that was what you did when there was no one else. You carried it until your back broke or you figured it out. Those were the only 2 options. And now a man she barely knew was standing on her porch, telling her he was going to fix everything she had been too proud and too tired and too alone to fix herself. "Why?" she said, and her voice cracked on the word because it was a question she had stopped asking a long time ago. Why did Danny leave? Why doesn't anyone help? Why is it always just me? She had stopped asking because the answers never came, and the asking only made the silence heavier. Brick looked at her. "Because your boy taught 500 men something we should have already known. This is the least we can do, and it won't be the last." Laura pressed her hand over her eyes. She stood in the doorway and cried, and didn't care that 15 men in leather vests were watching. Then she stepped aside and let them in. They worked for 3 days, tore off the old roof and put on a new one, replaced every window, fixed the front step with solid oak, installed a furnace that actually worked, one that didn't groan or rattle or die in the middle of the night. They patched the walls, fixed the plumbing, rewired the kitchen where the outlets had been sparking for months. They stocked the pantry and the fridge with real food, not the dollar store cans Laura had been stretching, but real groceries, the kind she walked past at the store because the prices made her stomach hurt. They built Huck a doghouse in the backyard, insulated, weatherproofed, his name carved into a piece of cedar above the door. And inside the house, next to the new heater in the living room, they put a dog bed, thick and warm and big enough for a golden retriever with a torn ear and a limp, who had led a boy through a blizzard and saved a 3-year-old's life. On the last day when the work was done, Brick found Laura sitting on her new front porch. Caleb was in the backyard with Huck. The house was warm, the roof was solid, the windows didn't rattle. Brick sat down beside her. For a long time, neither of them said anything. They just sat there like two people who had been through something together and didn't need words to acknowledge it. Then Laura said, "I keep trying to figure out how to thank you, and I can't. I don't have the words." "You raised that kid by yourself," Brick said. "No help, no money, no one watching, and he turned out to be the bravest person I've ever met. You don't owe me thanks. I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For every time I drove past a house like this and didn't stop. For every kid I didn't see because I wasn't looking." He paused. "Your boy was invisible, Laura, and that's not on him, that's on all of us." Laura didn't respond. She didn't need to. The truth sat between them like something solid, something you could lean against. Inside, Caleb's school picture was taped to the fridge, the one where his hair was messy and his smile was half there, and his eyes were looking just slightly to the left of the camera, like even in a photograph, he wasn't sure anyone was actually looking at him. 3 months later, Brick stood in front of the Wyoming Charter at a full meeting and proposed something that no one in the room expected: a winter outreach ride, organized by the Hells Angels, a fleet of riders delivering coats, blankets, boots, and supplies to children in rural communities, the forgotten towns, the invisible families, the kids who walked to school in someone else's coat that didn't fit and didn't zip and didn't keep the cold out. He called it Operation Cold Shield. The room went quiet. Brick wasn't a man who made speeches. He wasn't a man who proposed charity programs. He was an enforcer. He solved problems with his hands, not his words. Every man in that room knew that, and every man in that room could see that something had changed in him. Something fundamental, something that a 7-year-old boy had put there by lying down in the snow and refusing to let go. "I'm not asking," Brick said. "I'm telling you this is happening. The vote is a formality. Every man in this room saw what that kid did. Every man in this room stood on Cedar Avenue and bowed his head. If that didn't change you, nothing will. But I think it changed all of us. And this is how we prove it." The vote was unanimous. The first ride went out in November. 40 bikes, 8 towns, 312 coats delivered to children who had never owned a new one. Brick rode at the front. Caleb's leather patch was sewn onto his saddlebag. Lily's name was written on the first coat they handed out. In a town called Broken Bow, 60 miles south, they stopped at a school where a teacher had submitted a list of kids who needed winter gear. One of the names on the list was a 5-year-old boy named Marcus Reed. Brown hair, brown eyes, quiet. He sat alone at lunch, walked home alone after school. He was wearing a jacket with a broken zipper, 2 sizes too big. Brick looked at that kid and saw Caleb, saw himself, saw every invisible boy who ever learned to make himself small because the world didn't make room for him. He knelt down in front of Marcus and handed him a brand new winter coat. Red, his size, working zipper. Marcus looked at the coat, then looked at Brick. "For me?" "For you, kid." Marcus put the coat on, zipped it all the way up. Then he did something that knocked every man in that parking lot sideways. He stepped forward and hugged Brick, just wrapped his small arms around this giant man's neck and held on. And Brick, the enforcer, the convict, the man feared across 3 states, hugged him back, held him, didn't let go until the boy did. By the second year, Operation Cold Shield had expanded to 11 states, 2,000 coats, 400 pairs of boots, 600 blankets. Organized by men in leather vests riding through small towns in the dead of winter, handing warmth to children who had never expected anyone to show up, because one invisible boy reminded them what showing up meant. Back in Elk Ridge, Caleb started 3rd grade. He was still quiet, still shy in the way that doesn't go away overnight, the way that lives in your bones when you've spent years building walls around yourself. But the bench was never empty anymore. Derek was there every day, Oscar and Madison and Regan, and a growing circle of kids who had discovered something that should have been obvious all along, that the quiet kid in the corner was worth knowing. On the first anniversary of the blizzard, Brick brought Lily to the Dawson house. It was a Sunday. Laura made pancakes, the ones with chocolate chips, the ones Caleb had told Lily about while they lay in the snow. They sat around the kitchen table, all of them, Brick and Sarah and Lily. Laura and Caleb and Huck lying under the table with his head on Caleb's foot. It was warm. The new furnace hummed quietly. The windows didn't rattle. The roof didn't leak. Lily sat in a booster seat next to Caleb. She was 4 now, taller, still had those blonde curls and green eyes. She looked at Caleb while she ate, and every few minutes she reached over and put her small hand on his arm, like she was checking that he was still there. Like some part of her, some deep animal part that remembered, even if her conscious mind didn't, knew that this boy was the reason she was sitting at this table, eating pancakes on a Sunday morning, instead of lying under a pine tree in the frozen ground. After breakfast, Caleb took Lily to the backyard to meet Huck properly. Brick watched from the kitchen window. Lily was laughing, chasing the dog in circles, falling in the snow and getting up and chasing him again. Caleb was standing to the side, watching her, smiling that half smile of his that Laura said he'd had since he was a baby, the one that meant he was happy but didn't quite know what to do with it. Sarah came up beside Brick, took his hand. "She doesn't remember the snow," Sarah said quietly. "She doesn't remember any of it." Brick nodded. "Good. But he does." Brick watched Caleb through the window. The boy had picked Lily up because she wanted to see over the fence. He held her carefully, one arm under her legs, one hand on her back, the way you hold something precious. "Yeah," Brick said, "he does." And years from now, when people ask Jagger, Brick Mercer, about the coldest day of his life, he won't talk about the winters he spent locked up in Rawlins. He won't talk about frozen highway rides at 3 in the morning, or the nights he slept in a garage because he had nowhere else to go. He won't even talk about the blizzard itself. He'll say, "The coldest day of my life was the day a 7-year-old boy took off his only coat in a blizzard and wrapped it around my daughter and lay down beside her in the snow to keep her alive." And then he'll pause, and his voice will go quiet, and the hardness that he spent 20 years building around himself will crack just enough for the truth to come through. And the warmest day of my life was the day I watched 500 men bow their heads for that boy, because he showed us what the patch on our backs was supposed to mean all along. Not the fighting, not the riding, not the fear. Just this: you see someone cold, you give them your coat. You see someone alone, you sit beside them. You see someone invisible, you make damn sure the whole world sees them too. That is the code. That was always the code. And a 7-year-old boy from a house with a leaking roof and a broken furnace and one coat to his name understood it better than 500 men who wore it on their backs.